Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to the End of Life Journey and Beyond, the Sands of Time. This is our YouTube channel. My name is Susan Capurso. I'm an end of life doula and legacy specialist. And wait till you hear our guests today. Very exciting things happening. But first, let me introduce Lisa. Welcome, Lisa. It's nice seeing you again this week.
Always nice seeing you too, Susan. I'm Lisa Strahs-Lorenc. I'm a bereavement specialist, and it's always nice to be here. And this topic is a good one for me. Love this topic. So I want to introduce Kerri Tannenbaum. She is a passionate and proficient genealogist, always looking to solve family mysteries and provide new discoveries. She's a member of the Association of Professional Genealogists, National Genealogical Society, New York Genealogical and Biological Society, and a number of local genealogy societies. Love this topic, Kerri. Thanks so much for being with us.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Love it, Kerri. Thank you so much for coming. This is really, really exciting. I wanted to, just throw out at the beginning, the legacy work is important to Lisa and I. We do so many things about legacy and remembering and who our extended family was and putting things together. And I work on the book project with people before they go. And this topic is so important to us. And this is your world. This
It
is
is.
your world. You've become immersed in it. So let's tell our listeners a little bit about you today.
Sure. Well, genealogy is definitely my passion. I love helping people learn more about their family history, tell the stories about their ancestors. After all, people are more than just names and dates. They had a life and so much interesting information that affects really who we are today, their sacrifices, what they endured to get to the United States and start their life here. So there's so much about who we are as people, and I love to help them figure that out. It really gives them a sense of self, and then of course it's something we hope that they will pass on so that the legacy of their ancestors continues to be told.
That's wonderful, Kerri. And that's something that I say to clients and when I speak in front of groups as well, that this is something that validates your history. It gives you roots. It gives you your heritage. In
Yeah,
turn, it makes you feel more connected, and
absolutely.
have that sense of worthiness. It does something to you. And I'm sure you have some stories of clients that you've worked on actually that have rediscovered things that have turned their worlds upside down.
Yeah, and that happens. Obviously, there's those that through DNA, those who are trying to learn who their parents are, biological family. That often uproots their world when they have new discoveries in DNA. But a lot of times, I'm doing stuff just through regular paper records and documentation and learning their stories. And for sometimes it's, can you tell me if this story is true? And other times it's brand new discoveries that they had no idea about their family members. And so it really is so interesting to see them absorb this new information and figure out their excitement or just surprise at the information, and then how they share that with their other family members. And it becomes a way to connect them with those that are living, who that they can then say, we have this shared history together. So it's a great way to even connect you to your current relatives, because it's an excuse to call a cousin or an elderly aunt or uncle that may not be aware of this information. So it becomes a nice way to tie everybody together.
Kerri, I was just wondering, how'd you get involved with this?
Well, I've always been interested in genealogy, and I had an uncle who was one of the earlier days before all the internet access and all the databases that we have today. He did it, when it was just purely paper records. And he actually went to Ireland and did some research on site and would travel throughout New York or write to the different archives. And I was always fascinated by that. So I feel like in a way he's passed the baton to me. He has since passed, but it was just something I was always very interested in. And then on a personal level, I had a prior career working in marketing and media for about 25 years. And my role had changed. They had eliminated my position because the publishing and media world was in such, transition. And it was really an opportunity for me to figure out what's my next step. And while I was doing genealogy as a hobby, I started to really educate myself I started doing different programs. I did a certificate program through Boston University in genealogical research. And that really was the catalyst for me to think about doing this on a professional level. It was no longer just about me finding new discoveries for my family, but I actually got just as excited to do that for other families. And that's when I knew this might be something I can do for a living. And it's almost 4 years now that I've been doing it. I continue to educate myself and continue to learn and grow, but I just absolutely love making new discoveries for
I
others.
love this story, Kerri, because really, as we get older, one thing I think that we all start to realize is that we are exactly where we're supposed to be. You know, that journey
Yes.
takes us down this road in this path, and we get to be more inside of ourselves if we've been lucky and blessed enough. Some people never find that point, right?
Absolutely. Like I think about it, I would never have thought based on having a big corporate career. I was working in Manhattan. I had very long days. I was getting restless. I will say I kept thinking I want to do something else. I don't know what that is. And it just sort of evolved once I had the space to think about it, and then opportunities presented itself. So it is amazing how things evolved. But I do believe that everything I've done in my past has brought me to where I am now. And even just running my own business, having that business background has been really instrumental in helping me be successful
Sure.
as an
You needed to learn
entrepreneur.
that
Yeah,
before you could get to this place. So I want to ask you a question about the common person who picks up the phone and gives you a
sure.
call one day. Are they really all calling your clients for the same type of reason, just because they all want to just know, they're curious? Or are they very specific, different reasons that they want to look into their history?
It's a very big mix, and that's what I love is the variety. So you have some people who have been doing genealogy on their own for a long time, and they hit what we call a brick wall. And that's basically you've got to a point where they can't go any further, and that's when they seek the help of a professional. Then you have those that don't do genealogy at all. It's just something that they're curious about, and they would hire me to build out their family tree. It's I don't know anything about this particular line, or this anything about. I don't even know anything past my grandparents, and I'd just love to learn more. And so very often I'm, telling something to them for the first time, giving them names and countries where their family's from, and all the things that they weren't even aware of because they didn't even know anything past their more recent relatives. But there are also very specific things. I have a number of people who are looking to get dual citizenship. So I need to find birth, marriage, and death records to prove them back to their whether it be their grandparents or great grandparents that lived in either Ireland or Italy. Those are the most common ones. So they'll hire me to find those documents so that they can prove get their dual citizenship ultimately. That seems to be very popular lately. A lot of people are looking to do that. I've had people say, I've heard this family story. I don't know if it's true. And I find that out. I had one person that has a family business, and he didn't know what year the family business started, and he wanted me to research that. So there's lots of different reasons, very personal reasons where people have questions that they want answered, and other ones are just like, I'd just like to know somebody to build my family tree and know more about my ancestry. So it really does run the gamut. That's what's so interesting is that no project is alike. And the reality is you never know where projects will take you. So even if I start with somebody in New York, it could take me to another state. It could take me to another country. So I'm constantly going to different counties and jurisdictions to find records. And different time periods in history, I have to think about how the laws of that time affected what records are available. So there's a lot of research that goes into understanding how to pull the records for that particular need. But you can't predict all the time. You just don't know where an ancestor may have come from. So it really takes you all over the map, as they could say.
Well, I used to work for an international adoption agency.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And our children came from all over the world. We had one at the time that I was there. We had one that was a domestic adoption. And I think about her a lot, this baby, newborn baby.
Mm-hmm.
And I think about whether she was wondering about her biological mother and whether she wanted to do any searches. I don't think we had open records at the time. I know there are a bunch of open records now, but is that something that you research?
I personally have not delved into the genetic genealogy as much. I've done class work on it. I've done some work on my own family. I have not done that yet, only because there are a lot of ethical ramifications, and I personally want to get a little bit more training, because there is sort of like that angle of they may discover information that really can uproot their lives and the lives of the other people. So I think it's really becoming extremely proficient in that, because you don't want to make mistakes. You don't want to approach somebody and say, so you really, I personally have a long-term goal of getting more involved with genetic genealogy, but right now I just use it as a tool in the toolbox to maybe indicate what ethnicity somebody has, or if there's a really recent connection, I can kind of work with them. And I personally have met DNA cousins, and we've collaborated, shared old family photos that I would never have received had I not connected with that person. So there's a lot of value to using DNA, but I do want to say that it is an area that you really need to be very careful because of all those other ramifications that exist.
I love the journey that you take. And of course, with any profession, it can get quite tedious, and maybe you feel like you're up against the wall sometimes.
Yeah.
But I love that you have that passion, and that's what you do for your clients to keep moving forward. So I'm thinking as you're speaking, and I'm like, without revealing any privacy conversations, maybe you can share with us one of the bigger pertinent things that you found that shocked you and shocked the family. And there has to be a story that stands out maybe in your mind.
Well, one of a very good friend of mine approached me, and she had said that her father had kind of had an idea of who his father was, but was not raised by him. And that she thought there might have been a mafia connection or some type of scandalous thing, but she wasn't sure because there was no relationship. And her father is now in his mid 80s. So this is sort of something, even though his biological father has long passed, even in his 80s, this still weighs on him that he doesn't have a lot of information about his own father, and really just didn't even have a photo of him. And so that was really my goal, was to figure out who was his father really, even though we had a name, but what was his story. And it turns out that he was in jail for, I think it was in the 1930s, he had robbed a candy store and wound up at Sing Sing, of all places. And that was, very common for the time, because people were, during the Depression, they were down on their luck, and there's some of these petty crimes, but he did wind up in jail. And I figured out when he was released from jail, like he was released early, I was able to find the records through the New York State Archives of his release, which then validated that he was definitely potentially the father of him because of the dates of when he would have been conceived. I was like, he was released from prison at this time. He would have met his biological father would have met his birth mother, because they had never married. And it was like I was able to put a timeline together. Ultimately, I was able to work with immigration and get a file, because at the time he had not gotten naturalization. And so he had to file as an alien as required by law at the time. And there was a photo of him there in that file. It took about 6 to 8 months of a wait to get the file, but I was able to deliver this photo and the story of sort of like what happened during his lifetime that I was able to track for him. And he was a mysterious character, but the fact that I was able to deliver a photo brought such peace to her father, because he needed to see a picture of his own father. He had only remembered him slightly as a young boy, about 5 years old. So now he was in 83, and he finally got to see a picture of his father. And my friend got to see a picture of her grandfather that she had never met. So there was some closure for the family, but there was also a little bit of scandal there. He was a little bit of a character, and he had a colorful past. So they sensed that, so it wasn't as so much awe for them, as much as now everything starts to make sense. He had a definitely, he moved around a lot. He committed some crimes. He was, a man just moving around a lot, and hard to find. But I did find a number of records to basically map out his life, and ultimately figure out when he died as well.
Wow.
So that was probably one of the neatest projects. And and we're still working through it. I did use some DNA, and I connected them to some DNA cousins, and they figured out some more information as well that way. So the story continues because there's still more to learn about him, and some more questions came up. But for that family, there was so much closure. And now they have relatives that are pretty close relatives that they get together. So that's been nice that I've created a connection there.
That's wonderful, right, Lisa?
Yeah.
Creating these
Yes.
connections. What a
Yes.
beautiful thing.
Yes, my father was so funny. My father had the whole family tree thing going. And so whenever he would go to like a new place in Chicago or wherever, he'd open up the phone book. In those days, it was a phone book.
Yeah.
And he'd look under Strahs, our last name. And anybody who was a Strahs got a phone call from him.
Oh,
And this is how we discovered some cousins and some other relatives. He would just pick up the phone.
But that was the old way of doing things
Yeah.
because we didn't have the access we have now. So that was actually not so uncommon. He was a man of his time, or ahead of his time in some ways. So very smart though, because then
funny.
new discoveries, right?
Yes.
New
So,
So
connections.
Kerri, you found, his history in prison, in the prison system, and that's really interesting. But are there other things that you find along the way, like little details, like maybe the profession that they
Oh
work
yes. Oh,
in,
absolutely.
and maybe if there were, I don't know, if there were any newspaper articles or
Oh,
something.
newspapers are my favorite. Newspapers,
Yeah.
that's where all the stories are. So you figure newspapers were kind of the Facebook or the National Enquirer of the time, right? So they would post everything that would happen with these families. And that's how you get what I call sort of the colorful commentary about your ancestor. Uh, beyond the records that give the dates and just the dry information, now you're starting to sort of put some meat on the bones, and you're starting to really get a sense of who this person was. And sometimes it's through, the words of other people. So if there was an obituary or maybe there was a quoted article, you start to find out more about who they were as a person. I actually had a situation where my great grandfather had been in a very serious train accident. It was the Brooklyn elevated train back in 1903. And I had no sense of who he was, obviously. This is, a very distant relative. And through research, I was able to get a sense of who he was as a person based on the words of other people. There wound up being an inquiry into the accident, and his co-workers were testifying as to his character, and other people were speaking. And all of a sudden, I had a sense of who my great-grandfather was as a person. And interestingly, the words that were used to describe him as how I would describe my uncles. So I would say that these personality traits carried through, even though we never had the chance to meet him, and neither did my uncles because he had passed so early. But the fact that those characteristics carry it through the family, I'm like, that is amazing to me. Just those are the core traits of my family, and that carried through from my ancestor. So I love newspapers because you get that extra information and extra insights, and sometimes it's what helps break down a brick wall, where you'll get a clue that helps bring you to something else. So newspapers are by far one of my favorite tools to use. It just really rounds it out. But to go back to your earlier question, I do have a number of really interesting finds. When I come across somebody who served in the Civil War, when I come across somebody who even maybe had a very unique death circumstances for the time, or an occupation. I have one client, one of his ancestors actually was instrumental in a park in Chicago, which is the equivalent of Central Park in New York. It's the big park in Chicago, and his ancestor had the foresight to design that park and make sure it happened as a reality. So I've been able to share that information, and that is wonderful because then he can go visit Chicago and look at it from a different lens, knowing that his ancestor had a very big part in the future of the geography of that area. I have another one who his ancestor was one of the founders of Norwich, Connecticut. and that their surname is throughout the whole town. There's all different references, street names and all that. So it's just really amazing when you can share this information with a client to say, it lives on today in some form, and your sixth great grandfather, his his legacy continues. So I think it's very fun to deliver that type
It
of
sure
news.
is.
Yeah.
Sure is. I have to just share this while you're telling us this story. Here's me sitting here thinking. Now, I've been an end-of-life doula for 4 to 5 years, right? I have things in my computer. I have things I've done, workshops, talks, everything. My two boys don't really hardly know about anything that I do. And I try to offer them information, but boys, right?
And they're younger, they don't appreciate it now as much.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Well, they're 25 and 30. So I
But
think
still,
they
I
should
think
be
it's
more
later.
interested. But anyway, they did not see the books that I published because they can physically hold them in their hands. But I'm thinking of the newspaper articles, right? So when I had started out the first year, the New York Post did a 3-page spread on end-of-life doulas. So I'm out there in internet world and I'm in newspapers and I know that. So I'm sitting here listening to you and I'm thinking, well, guess what? If my grandchildren or great grandchildren ever really want to know about their great grandma, and I don't have these things in place, although I need to get one of my books together for them, then Kerri's grandchildren or great granddaughter, the baton will have switched to them, and they'll be doing the research, and they'll very easily pull up information all about me online that they can give the family
Absolutely.
because
Absolutely.
of the internet now today and newspapers, right?
Absolutely. All that stuff will be findable to future generations. And I come across situations too where people are like, oh, I don't need this yearbook anymore. I want to discard it. I'm like, no, 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 no. Your future ancestors will want to find a picture of you in your yearbook. So I will donate that yearbook then to a historical society or a library, because even though they're not interested in keeping their high school yearbook anymore from 50 plus years ago, somebody's going to want to see that. So don't discard that. Donate it to some type of organization that believes in preserving history, to make sure that your future descendants can find you. That's what I basically tell people. And so yes, that newspaper clipping of you will absolutely be an important clue as to who you are and your profession.
That was a really good tip about the books, though, that everybody should really be, privy to that and be careful with any of the historic documents
Yes.
that you do have in your home and find a place to put them.
Yeah, there are
That's
places
one.
that will absolutely take that, whether it's local historical societies, public libraries, genealogy societies, depending on where you live, what's more popular. Most places do have some type of genealogical society or historical society. So that's usually a good first stop.
So many
Wow.
years ago, I knew that my biological mother had died, and I knew the date and everything else. I was 2 at the time. She was 26. And it occurred to me when I was probably, I guess, in my 20s or 30s, that there might be newspaper articles about this accident, because it was an
Hmm.
accident. And there was microfiche in one of the libraries
Hmm.
through Long Island Press. And there it was. There was the accident, in addition to naming me as one of the survivors,
Wow.
and I was 2 at the time. So things have come so much further now that you can do and that you can gain information from and access to.
Absolutely. Yeah. And even the searching tools are better than they used to be, because that was very time intensive to be scrolling through microfilm and estimating the dates. Now you can do searches so easily. Sometimes you just have to do variations on the name because it's very specific, but there's lots of digital newspaper sites available that house thousands of newspapers, and by using all the different ones you have a pretty good chance of covering the bulk of the newspapers for that area. So
Harry, do you ask the families to get involved with your search? Do you ask for help along the way with the project and
well,
feeding you as much
usually
information as they can, I guess, right?
I always ask them for starting point information, and that's whatever they have. They may or may not have records They definitely should have family stories, and that's a lot of times family stories have clues in them. It doesn't mean it's necessarily perfectly accurate, but there's usually clues. So I do ask them to do a consultation with me, and then I provide a background form, and I just to jog some thoughts for them. And do you know what religion they were? Because that can affect the record sets that you look at. Where do you happen to know where they lived, or general time period when they may have married, anything like that, anything that they know from talking with relatives or happen to have any actual documents. It's my starting point, it's my background information, and then I use that to create a plan based on whatever their objective is. But yes, why reinvent the wheel, and why go down the wrong path? The reality is there's so many people with the same names. So what differentiates them is some of that unique information about the family unit, the time and place that they lived. And so the more information I start off there, it becomes differentiating from other same name people. And so that becomes the platform for me to work from.
How long does it take sometimes for these projects to get to where they want you to be?
Good question.
Yeah, well, that's the magic question. So what I do personally, because you can never say how long something's going to take, quite honestly, unless it's a record lookup where this archive has this file, it's going to take me an hour to go get the file and return it, that type of thing. That's pretty straightforward. But any other objective, you just don't know what you're going to find until you start looking. And so I usually work with my clients in installments. And depending on how complex I think this project is, I'll usually start with about 10, 15, or 20-hour installment. And I show them what I can do for them in that time. My job as a genealogist is to do analysis and correlation of my findings and put it into a written conclusion. So that takes a little bit of time, because it's not just finding the records, it's actually figuring out how do all these records relate to each other. Is there conflicting information that I have to figure out which is right? And do I have to do more research to figure out which one is right? So it gets much more involved the deeper you go. So the written conclusion is key, because that client will be able to see my thought process. They'll see visuals of all the records that I've found. It's fully cited, so that they know exactly that I got it at a legitimate place, and if they ever need to find it again. And I always put next steps at the end, because unless I've solved the specific question, there's always more to do, right? The tree goes on. It's kind of infinite. You keep going as you go back. It just branches off and off. So if they would like, there's always something else to do. Or I might have very specific things, like I was able to accomplish this during this time period, and I would recommend getting some of these other records to solidify my conclusion, or to rule something out. So my clients always know what I've done. And this is the one thing it's very important to note for any genealogist, is that no genealogist can guarantee results. There's no way you can, because you don't know what you're going to find. You're hiring a genealogist for their expertise and their time and their expertise. What they should be doing is showing you how they use that time. So even if they don't find the answer, they should be telling you what they looked at, all the resources that they used. And we call that negative findings, negative search findings, basically. And so not to do that in the future. That's all been covered, so that you can then come up with a game plan of what else to research. So that's a very big part. And it's hard for people, because I think a natural inclination is to say, how long is this going to take? How much is it going to cost me, so that I can get this done? And no genealogist can really promise any of that. But they can promise what they will report on their findings based on the time that they were hired.
That was great. You put that very well with your words. Do you ask them to sign something at the beginning?
I do. I have a contract that I outline. Everything is, I'm a business, so I have to make sure that everybody understands. It protects both of us. So I do a contract. I outline the objective. I outline the number of hours that they've secured with me, and the rate, and everything from confidentiality. So I let them know everything they've worked on with me is confidential. That's why I don't have client reports on my website, because it's confidential to my clients. Unless they've given me permission to share something, that would be different. But I cover confidentiality, the scope of the program, everything, so there's no questions. You just don't want anybody to be upset at the end. And I think the more you communicate up front
Of
and everybody
course,
has a
yeah.
solid understanding. And so once we've done that, I do a contract, I do the background information form. Those are the two pieces right up front when I do when somebody's agreed to continue working with me. And that usually then triggers the process. But I often say to people, especially for those working with me for the first time, is like, why don't you just hire me for like 10 or 15 hours and you'll get a good idea of the type of work I do and whether or not this is something you'd like to continue.
That's perfect.
It's no
Yeah,
pressure because I get it. I'm an unknown entity to them and they don't know. So it's a great way to sort of break the ice with them and to show them. And I have to say, I do have some longtime clients. I have one client that has already hired me for 10 projects. So he just keeps doing
wow,
additional installments. I have
wow.
another one that I'm on my eighth installment for him. And so, and sometimes they book me right away, one after the next. Sometimes they take a couple of months break and they say, okay, I'm ready to start up again. But it's one of these things because they've become accustomed to what I can do for them and they like the reports and it's something they can share with their family. I make my reports very visual
Oh,
and very
nice.
easy to understand. It's a combination of sort of interesting and informative, I'd say, because you want to make sure it doesn't, you don't want it to feel like a term paper, you, even though I am as a genealogist supposed to do a certain formal written conclusion, you still have to think of your audience and the fact that they're
That's
not in
right.
school reading a term paper. They want to be entertained and informed about their family in an engaging way. And so I usually deliver a PDF to them and encourage them to share it with their family.
Does there ever come a time where people are really shocked at what they learn or disappointed or,
I think the disappointment is in the situations where either the family story was not verified
Mhm.
or like I had one client recently who had heard a story that her grandparents had met on the boat coming over and that's when they fell in love and then got married once they got to New York from Germany. And I could not find anything to prove that. I found the grandfather on the boat and I literally went through every listing on that boat and the grandmother was not there. So I could not validate that. And I know it was disappointing because you have this idealized version of they probably met shortly after, they both came to New York, but it was unfortunate because I know it disappointed her, but my job is to tell the truth. And I try to deliver it in a non-emotional way and just be like, here's the facts. These are my findings, suggest this, that type of thing to soften it. But I have to go by what the research finds until there's new information that's maybe been released or is now accessible that might change my conclusion. But based on certain things like her name was not on the roster for the passenger manifest, she probably was not on that ship. So yes, there are some situations where people are disappointed. And there are instances where I cannot, find what they're looking for, but I will, as I said, show them everything I've done so they have confidence to know that I've looked in all these other places. But the truth prevails in the end,
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Now, so our video comes out this week, and you have all these new families getting as excited as I am because Lisa, don't you just want to know more now? It's been such an inspiring conversation we're having. So what if 100 people contacted you and said, I want to do this. When can we get started? So how does your scheduling work? Because you only have so many hours of
Yeah.
your day. So
Yeah,
do
that's
you
a
have
great.
clients on a wait?
Yes, I do have a wait list. And if it's something where it's more urgent, I do have a network of genealogy colleagues as well. It's a wonderfully generous community and we all support each other. So if there's a time sensitivity, then I would refer to somebody else. And I'm not the fit for every single person because there are specialties within genealogy. So if somebody requires a certain geographical expertise, for instance, Italian genealogy, once it goes back to Italy, you really need to know the language. It's very hard to work with records unless you have an understanding of the Italian language. I've done some research in that, but very often I'll refer to an Italian specialist. And I have a network of several very talented colleagues that, are proficient in Italian. So, so in a case like that, I might say I can get you to the point of your immigrant ancestor, but then I would have to refer you to somebody who has an Italian expertise. Similarly, when things go back, it might be like colonial records, and some people specialize in the handwriting of the time and the particular types of records. So there are specialties, as I mentioned, within genealogy, even the genetic genealogy. So I always do a consultation, and of course it's for free. And then when I assess what they're looking for, and I think I'm a good fit for it, then I will let them know on my availability. If I don't think I'm a good fit, I say, I think I can recommend you to somebody. And the beauty of it also is that I'm part of the Association of Professional Genealogists, so we do have a directory as well, and there's lots of people listed there by their specialty as well. So I'm very honest and upfront with people what I think I can do. And if my schedule is, I usually do a first come, first serve with my schedule. So, and I tend to do these installments. So I'll be able to say, oh, I can start your project in 2 weeks, that type of thing.
Exactly. I'm getting so excited during this video. I just want you to know.
The wheels are turning.
But what I would like from you, for me, is you to hand deliver me a book. I don't care if it takes 6 months or a year, and to tell me about the last 10 generations of people before Susan and what they did and how many kids they had and what their professions were and what they love to do on Friday night. So,
well, that's a big project though, because 10 generations. But yes, but I know it's amazing. See, and the big thing is the challenge for genealogists is actually getting it down to like as close to a specific research question as possible, because we don't realize that as we go back on our tree, it just keeps branching and branching. So we have 4 grandparents. You take into account your maternal and paternal side. You have 4 grandparents. You have 8 great grandparents. You have 16 great grandparents, 32, and all of a sudden it's doubling as you go back, and it can get very overwhelming because it keeps branching off. So part of my role is actually to help to focus my clients to say, what specific line are you looking for? Because it can, for me as a genealogist, I could be then all over the place. So it's my job to really narrow it down and say, let's work on this line first. And then if you want to have, that coverage, all your great-grandparents known. I want to know all 8 of my great-grandparents. Then I can jump over to another line and get to that level. So some people want to go back as far as they can on one line. I have one client right now who envisions doing a big family tree and posting it on his wall. And he wants to go back he wants to know all 16 second great grandparents. And so that's the goal, is to find each of those and have all their information so we can do a really beautiful chart for the wall. So everybody has a different goal.
Gone back?
I'm sorry?
The furthest you've gone back for somebody. How many generations?
Well, I can tell you from my own tree, I have gone back to my 6th great grandfather, who was a Revolutionary War patriot. So I'm a member of Daughters of the American Revolution, and I was able to prove that. So that was one of my earlier ones where I went back to the 1700s. I do have some clients as well that I'm into the 1700s. So it kind of falls around the 5th or 6th grandparent level when you're in that, depending on how old they were. Each of the generations, like 20 to 30, years between. So, so I tend to go back to the 1700s, personally. And I do a lot of New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania research. Of course, my research has taken me to other states, because you just never know where ancestors are from. But I tend to gravitate into those geographic areas. And then very often it brings me back to Ireland, Italy, or Germany because of the immigration patterns through New York into the U.S. So, I'd say probably about 6th great grandparent is a safe level to say. You have to remember, there's less records as you go further back. You wouldn't have vital records. They all started a lot of times in the late 1800s, early 1900s where vital records were required. So before that, you're relying on baptismal records, deeds, tax records, all different types of records that you have to do a little bit more digging at the courthouses and the archives, because not everything is digitized. So that's why knowing the jurisdiction, you have to know the county where somebody lived, and those jurisdictions, those boundaries change. So you kind of have to figure out, where they might have been and where those records might be. But as you go back, there's not as many records, and it's really tough to find the women too, because obviously all the laws favored men, so figuring out even a female surname as you go back can be really challenging.
Sure.
So.
Before we go any further, could you just give out your contact information so people have it?
Sure. Well, my website is family.connector.com. And I know it's confusing, so .family, .connector.com. And then otherwise I can be reached at Kerri, Kerri, at family.connector.com. So would love to hear from anybody that has questions. And as I said, if I'm not the right person, I can certainly refer them to the right person, because I have such enthusiasm for just people learning about their family history. So just want to help them on that journey of making some new discoveries.
Kerri, what's your, I have one more question, but what's your telephone number?
Sure. It's 516-312-6104. And you can either text me or call me at that number.
Thank you. So I know of a close person who was told a couple generations down that their real father was a very famous person.
Okay.
And we reached out to this famous person and never heard anything back. So of course, when it comes to DNA, that's not something you dabble in, I know. But what if somebody, is there a way to find more information? Like perhaps from the ancestors that the family does know and the ancestors from that famous person, to connect the two dots?
Yeah, a lot of times.
Or dot connector.
Yeah, so a lot of times, and that's used as a strategy used with DNA too, like where you might find some cousins that are a little more distant, and you can actually build out their tree back to what they call the most common recent ancestor. So you're kind of figuring out where do you connect, and then you build out your trees coming down. So first you figure out who you might relate to, and then you kind of build it out. And that's where that famous person might come up when you've sort of worked on expanded out that other person, that cousin's tree. Sometimes, depending on what type of figure if it was like, say if it was a past president. So a lot of times their family trees are actually been well researched by genealogists, and they're documented. So some famous people are well documented, whether it was a political figure or even somebody famous actor or actress. Sometimes like genealogists have made that their cause to build out their tree. So that could exist, and then you could figure out where you fit to that. Other times it would be using a combination of DNA and documentation records, to connect. I always get a little leery, I will be honest, when people say I'm related to the King of England, and I understand, I go back to this time, and I'm always leery because there's very few records to connect you. Although I will say the English get very good records, and again, if it's royalty, you can probably go into that. But that seems to be one of the most popular questions I get is, how can I prove that I'm connected to royalty? And so there's a lot of people, because what happens is they look at online trees, like there's Geni.com, GENI.com, and it's kind of like a public family tree. And so people publish these trees, and then other people can come in and sort of connect into them, and then say, oh, I go all the way back 1,000 years to this person. But there's no documentation on those trees to even support whether or not it's right or wrong. So I always say, look at those as clues, and maybe it would be really neat to say that you're connected to royalty, but the chances are probably a little bit slimmer. It's very hard to prove it out. So, whoop, I think you're muted.
Doing things like that would actually be a good tip sheet for you to have some clues to maybe start your journey with. But not something that they can trust unless a professional has taken over the project. Well,
the beauty of it, there is a tremendous amount of free information out there for people who are looking to do genealogy on their own. FamilySearch.org, their mission, the Mormon Church had started Family Search, and their mission is to have everybody doing genealogy, and they provide a lot of their services for free. So, and they offer a lot of educational opportunities. There's a lot of information out there, a lot of free resources. There's also paid resources like Ancestry is a paid site, but FamilySearch.org is a free site. So when people want to just get started and maybe learn a little bit, those can be really great starting points. There's lots of free webinars on all different topics. So I always encourage people, get started on your own and see what you can do. Inevitably, they'll hit a brick wall because you don't know what you don't know. It's one of those, I'm still learning, because it's such a vast topic. You can't be an expert in everything. But that's when they might say, okay, I've gotten as far as I can go, and maybe it's time to turn to a professional, or maybe it's time for more education, which maybe they'll do paid education at that point. So I just want to say, like, there's lots of opportunities, and I don't only do research for people, I actually also coach people. So very recently I had somebody that said they did not want me to do the research, but they wanted me to create a research plan for them so that they could do the research. Yeah. So they wanted to know, what websites would I go to? Where would I find this type of information? And I created an actual report, but that was truly a plan for all the things that they would need to
do their own work. Yeah.
So I can mentor people and coach them because they don't necessarily want somebody else doing it. They want to learn from me. And then there's some that ask me to do it, but communicate that they're extremely interested in learning. So I might make my reports a little bit more detailed for them and give them sort of like the methods that I use so that they can replicate that in their own research efforts as well. So that's why it's so important to have that initial conversation, because I can get a sense of, some people like just do it and report back to me, and other people, can you tell me how you? Absolutely. It's all about, sharing and evolving and learning, but I just want to say there's so much out there. It can get actually very overwhelming because there's so much genealogy education, but for those who are interested in it as a hobby, it's a wonderful community. Everybody's extremely generous with their knowledge. There's lots of Facebook groups for those that are comfortable online, LinkedIn groups, but Facebook is a wonderful area to really learn from others and connect with others interested in it. And what I can say is that we work with the people who are aging very often, and it's a great way to keep your mind sharp because you're using your brain in new ways. And so I always encourage retirees to take up a hobby, and something like genealogy can be a really wonderful way for them to keep their brain sharp, and as well as attend society meetings. For instance, on Long Island, I belong to about 4 genealogy societies. One is the Irish Family History Forum. So for those with Irish heritage, they do a monthly presentation with a guest speaker. And so you can go to the meetings, you hear the guest speaker, you're learning new things, and then you also have an opportunity to speak with other like-minded people. So there's the Italian genealogy group and the German genealogy group. So there's something for everybody, but depending on what your heritage is and what your interests are, these could be great ways to connect people that way, just by common interest of a hobby.
Wow.
Wonderful.
I love that.
One more time, could you just repeat all the contact information again?
Sure. So my website is family.dotconnector.com. My website is Kerri, Kerri, at family.connector.com. And my phone number is 516-312-6104. And that is my cell number, so you can text me as well.
So
wonderful.
Amazing. Love this.
Wonderful.
Oh, I'm so glad.
So Lisa, let's tell us a little bit about what you do before we go.
Sure. So as a bereavement specialist, I help people with their journeys. Everybody has an individual journey, and I help them celebrate those who've lost and move forward with their lives. I've also published 2, as you know, books that all the monies go to the Lustgarten Foundation for pancreatic cancer research and eventual cure. And they can see it at www.familiesmoveon.com. And then there's you, Susan, legacy work and everything else.
Oh, well, the only thing that I want to mention today is the legacy book project I'm doing. So if it's not genealogy, facts and details, and if you do want to know what their favorite food was for dinner and their favorite color of clothes and the things they did on Friday nights to entertain themselves, well, that's where I come in. And I love where, Kerri, you talked about, especially for seniors now, this is a great project to work on. And I've narrowed
Absolutely.
mine down into a 4-week project where we get together and I take all of that audio and I weave it into a beautiful 12 by 12 hardcover book with pages that can't be torn and can be passed on for generations and generations to come so that they know these details about you.
I
So
love it.
that's what I do. And you can reach out to me. The information's above. eastenddoulacare.com has all the information on it as well. But I can't even tell you, this has been wonderful, Kerri, because I've wanted to know more about this myself in order to refer you to clients and so many other things we've talked. But I really appreciate your time today.
Yeah.
Oh, and thank you for the opportunity. This was really fun getting to talk to you guys. You guys are doing, I think, a very important work. So, and I love just continuing and other ways to continue the legacy. So it's amazing.
Very
Thank you
good.
again. I appreciate your time too.
Thank you
so
for
much.
joining us.
We
Have a
appreciate it.
great,
See you next time.
great day, ladies. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye bye.